So what about bone growth? What are the two types? So two types of bone growth are endochondral and intermembranous ossifications. Ossification is the process of the bone formation. We're going to start with the endochondral ossification. Which sounds very complicated, but it is, it is very complicated, but we're not going to dive into the whole complexity. So let's first break down the name. So ossification, development of the bone. Endo, inside, chondral, cartilage. So this process refers to the development of the bone within the cartilage. Does that make sense? Now, what you start in endochondral ossification with is, okay, so when a fetus develops, the fetal skeleton at certain stage of development, I believe it's 2 months post-conception, the fetal skeleton at that stage of development is made entirely out of a hyaline cartilage. Does that make sense? So the fetus doesn't have any bones yet, just cartilage. Okay? You with me? So now, as an example, we're going to use kind of a long bone. Okay? So first step that starts is right here in the center. So first step is formation of primary ossification center. Okay? It forms in the diaphysis. So this primary ossification center in the diaphysis eats away the cartilage. And when cartilage is eaten away, what forms is medullary cavity. And eventually, the cartilage starts being replaced by the bone from the outside, forming so-called bony collar. Finally, not yet finally, but almost finally, the step 4. You can break it down into even more steps. I just kind of giving you the whole sequence. During the step 4, secondary ossification centers. Form. Does that make sense? Now look, where do they form? They form in the epiphysis. Okay, so far makes sense? How I want you to think, it sounds terrible, how I want you to think about ossification centers. Think about ossification centers as structures that are eating away cartilage, replacing it with a bone. Are you following? So when endochondral ossification is complete, all the cartilage is replaced by the bone except. So when complete, cartilage remains, in the epiphyseal growth plate, and on articular surfaces. I'll explain what it is in a second. Okay? So epiphyseal growth plate, as mentioned, is going to look like this. What is the articular surface? Articular surface of the bone is any surface of the bone that articulates with another bone. So for instance, here in the elbow joint, okay, like trochlea of the humerus is the articular surface. Does that make sense? Like this one. Okay, the head of the humerus here is the articular surface. The surface of the glenoid cavity of the scapula is the articular surface. So this is where articular cartilage remains, and actually in a healthy person it stays and stays and stays and stays. Any questions on that? This is what you need to know. I will not ask farther than that. Okay, like if you can tell me, primary ossification center in the diaphysis, it's out, forms medullary cavity, forms bony collar. Secondary ossification centers later form in the epiphysis, replace the cartilage with the bone there, two places where the cartilage remains, growth plate, and the surface of the bone. That's all. Most of the bones in the human skeleton are formed by endochondral ossification. Virtually almost all the bones below clavicles. Second type of ossification is intramembranous. Now, I won't be able to draw anything here, okay? But, well, I mean, I kind of can try to. So imagine that, bones of the, cranium, during the fetal development is formed out of the connective tissue membrane. Okay, does that make sense? So you've got the membrane formed out of the connective tissue, and you've got the ossification center, which forms, it's usually more than one ossification center. So ossification center forms, okay? Connective tissue is replaced. So connective tissue, CT just for shortness, is replaced with spongy bone. I mean, it's like spreading, like a disease spreading, like a rash. I don't know how to compare. Okay, spreads through the connective tissue membrane, replacing the connective tissue with the trabecular bone, spongy bone, and finally, the outer layer is remodeled into compact bone. Have you dealt with really, really small kids? I'm talking months. Have you held them, touched them, So if you touch their hand, there are, I don't know, to be frank, I don't know. I know the proper anatomical name. There are multiple fontanelles. The soft spots, is that what's the right name? Soft spot? Okay, that's easy. So those are called fontanelles. In the fontanelles, this connective tissue hasn't ossified yet. Makes sense? It's basically fragments of the bone that are connected by the connective tissue that allows the skull easily to expand. Okay? Good? Makes sense? Again, this is what I want you to know here about ossification.